When my daughter Cherish was born, she was a very difficult baby. And when I say difficult, I mean difficult to the sense that she would cry all the time. She was always crying and nothing would quiet her down. We would give her her bottle and feed her. I would put her in a swing or burp her or change her diaper. None of that worked. I'd take her outside and walk around. We literally had to take her outside and walk her in the middle of the morning in her stroller. And I remember neighbors would just be turning on their lights, looking out the window, coming out their house, standing on their porch watching. And my daughter would just be welling at the top of her lungs. And sometimes I would just take her for a ride in the car, and that wouldn't help. So, we would take her back and forth to the hospital. Nothing was wrong with her. She had been diagnosed with microcephaly and selective mutism. They said she had an underdeveloped brain. And, other than that, she was on a low percentile for her height and weight, but other than that, she was fine, So I ended up going to the store one day and I saw these videos by Baby Einstein, these Baby Einstein videos. So for some reason, I just picked up a couple of them. I just picked them up and I thought this would be good because I was always looking for like educational things for my child, even though she was a baby. And so I remember one day when she was crying, I picked her, I put her up in her little baby seat. I put on this video and I set her in front of the video. And the video, it played all types of classical music and it would have all these shapes and patterns of different colors just flashing across the screen. And my daughter would quiet down. This was the only thing that kept her quiet. And sometimes she would sit in front of there watching for hours and you couldn't turn it off. I tried to turn the video off. She would go back to crying and, so that was at that point what quieted her down. And my daughter, she was very regressed. She did not meet many milestones. She did not meet any of the milestones at the age she was supposed to meet them. I remember she didn't start crawling until she was 14 months old. And when she crawled, it wasn't like a regular crawl. She actually held one leg up and she would kind of do a scoop, like a hop, almost a scoop around on one knee. And that was her form and version of crawling. But we were just so excited when she did that because it's like, it took so long for her to actually crawl and do something. She hadn't, and she wouldn't even say any words at all. It's like, she wouldn't even say anything. And so it got to the point where Help Me Grow had came in. We had gotten some services for them, some intervention services through Help Me Grow. And I remember they would come out to the house to try to work with her. And so they referred us to the Cuyahoga County Board of MRDD for my daughter. And so the school bus would come outside and pick her up every day. They took her to the school where they were trying to teach her like how to communicate non-verbally since she wasn't able to speak. And I remember the teacher she had would do little signs and say more, do things like that to try to get her to express herself. Because see, my daughter wasn't able to express herself verbally and she would become so frustrated. She would always have these tantrums and we didn't know what she wanted. It's like she would get very, sometimes even aggressive and violent because she could not express what she wanted and what she needed. And if you did not understand her, she would have this meltdown. And I remember she would have so many different tantrums and fits, and just getting her dressed on a daily basis was a chore. I remember sometimes we would just, it would be a battle to get her in clothes. And my daughter always won, okay? I remember I would buy her all these different cute little outfits and shoes, and she would not want to wear it. She would not. She would literally want to wear the same thing every single day. And I would just have to try and negotiate and compromise with her. And she would, even with shoes, it's like, she would go out the door with the shoes she wanted on, even if it didn't even match the outfit. And I remember one time during the summer, she had this swimsuit I bought her because she loved water. And I bought her this pink swimsuit and she wanted to wear that swimsuit every single day. And I would get her up, get her bathed and everything, and she would put on that swimsuit. She would not wear clothes. She would not put on anything else, no matter how I tried to compromise with her. And she got her way. She got her way to the point I ended up putting her on the swimsuit. And we would literally have to walk around in the stores and go shopping. I remember people would look at us. We would be in the store. My daughter had on this pink swimsuit. And it was embarrassing. It was, but that was our daughter. We were used to it. That was Cherish. Everybody knew her siblings. We all knew that was these were her idiosyncrasies. And we learned to deal with that. And I remember whenever my daughter, we would go somewhere, she would always have to sit in the car on the same side of the seat. She would sit in the back seat on the passenger side. I mean, not on the on the driver's side, right behind the driver's seat. And she would always have to sit there. If someone forgot and they ended up getting in the car first and sitting in her seat, she would have a fit and she would, yell and try to fight them and they would have to move. We would have to move. No one could sit in her seat. We knew that was her seat. And these are things that we just dealt with. And we start to adapt with those characteristics. And, the teachers, she wasn't able to communicate. They would talk about how, other children wanted to befriend her. They liked her. She was, cherished. My daughter was a loving girl. She was sweet to the point she drew people. And she was a very pretty girl. And girls always wanted to be friends with her. And she wasn't friends with anyone. The thing is, they would be friends with her, but she wasn't friends with them. It's like, if my daughter had kids at school try to play with her, she would go off by herself. She was in her own world. She didn't want to have anyone playing with her. She didn't want anyone in her space. She just went off, and she would have her same toy. She would play this repetitive play where she would go every day. She would line up all these dolls, and you see her playing and lining up her dolls, or she would just push these things around and move them. She would have certain things. She would just push them around, and that's how she played. She didn't really communicate with anyone. You didn't see her playing tag outside with other children, and she just really wouldn't verbalize herself. So the teacher would have to write notes and tell me about her day, because my daughter, she just couldn't verbalize. And when she got, a little bit older, she could get to the point where she would, say little words. Like, she couldn't even put together cohesive, coherent, full sentences. By 3 years old, she would only say words, just single words. And when she did finally start being able to talk, she would just talk about how all the kids were noisy. She would always come home, she was covering her ears. She didn't like noise. The teachers would tell me at lunchtime that she couldn't take all this noise. And she had all these different, odd personalities and behaviors of things that she would do. And I remember she would always watch the same cartoons over and over. She would have to watch the same cartoons, the same episodes, to the point where she could recite line from line, what they would say. And we were used to this. But I knew that it was just strange. And then when her brother came along, they both, her brother had, disabilities as well, but it wasn't as severe. You could tell that, he was a lot more intelligent when it came to his sister, because my daughter, it's just, she had a trouble in every area. And so they both struggled with insomnia. It was hard for them to go to sleep. They put them on some, I think it was clonidipine or clonazepam. It was a medication that started with a C, because my kids, they would be up running around at night, and they would not go to bed. And I would tell the doctors all this stuff. Why are they not going to bed? It's like, okay. And I had to give them they had to wear pull-ups. They were like 2, 3, 4. My daughter wore a pull-up for a long time, and they would wear them to bed because they were wet to bed. And so, my kids suffered trauma. They did suffer some trauma, and because they really couldn't talk about it. But, I knew the trauma was there and that it occurred, because when my daughter was going to therapy, they had her act out dolls, and they said that they could tell that something had happened, even though she couldn't really talk about what had happened. But I knew that this was more than just trauma. I felt that my daughter had some other type of disability that she wasn't properly diagnosed with. So I decided, by the time my daughter was about 10 years old, I wanted to get a second opinion, because I wanted to put my daughter in this school, because I felt she had autism. I felt that she was on the autistic spectrum or something. And I had, at that time, I was talking to other people whose children were, were diagnosed with autistic spectrum. And I felt that my daughter's behaviors and characteristics and traits had, kind of resembled something of someone who would have autism. And so there was this well-known school that I want to put my child in for children who were, suffering with autism. And I wanted her to get the proper education and treatment. So I went and got a second opinion. And when I got this opinion, they actually ended up saying that she did not have they did not diagnose her with the autistic spectrum. They actually said she had selective mutism and intellectual disability. And so I didn't really agree with those diagnoses, but it was nothing I could do. And so, I left it at that, because see, at that time, I had, my children had Medicaid. They were disabled, so they qualified for Medicaid. So they were getting Medicaid, and I was working at a bank making only $12 an hour, so I didn't have much money. And so I remember a few years later, the Holy Spirit was showing me things. It was talking about how they were misdiagnosing children, how my children weren't diagnosed properly, and they were doing this to mostly, these are minority people and people of low socioeconomic status who are poor. And they were diagnosing them because they didn't want to, I don't know, it's just a part of systemic racism. They did not want our children to get the proper help and treatment that they needed. And as a result, a lot of children were suffering. Now, it wasn't until I had moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, when my daughter was having all these problems. She was having seizures, and she had all these different ailments. And I took her to this well-known children's hospital. And I remember they had placed on one of the papers after she was seen, they put on there all her diagnosis and they put autism on there. And I just looked at it and I was kind of like, I was confused, like autism. I was like, so how do they know she has autism? So I'm thinking, and this is doctor, this hospital, they knew their stuff. It's like autism. So they knew that I started thinking, I'm like, okay, so my daughter had autism all along, even though I felt she had autism, but she was diagnosed with all these different things. And so I remember when when we moved back to Ohio, so we had to leave after everything that had transpired. I was thinking to myself that, I'm going to get my daughter another diagnosis. I want to have her evaluated again because I was trying to see if I could pursue some type of legal action because, see, I felt if my daughter had been misdiagnosed all these years, I wanted, to have that, I wanted to file a lawsuit. And so all these issues kept happening. My daughter kept having seizures. I had to take them out of school. And that's when Children and Family Services came in, said the educational neglect. And then, my daughter started having issues. And the whole thing happened with my daughter and my children being taken out of the home. So I was never able to pursue that. But looking at it today, where my daughter, where they say she's having tantrums, she's acting out, they have her on all these different medications. They have her on, all these different medications for depression and schizophrenia and all these different things. And, the Lord was showing me how, like I said, a lot of children who were not diagnosed properly, they ended up, as a result, a lot of them did not get the treatment and help they needed. They're not able to function when they become adults. A lot of them have not been able to function in society. And some of them have been getting, placed into jail. They've been given criminal records, getting into legal trouble due to them not being able to function properly. Some of them have been diagnosed with mental illnesses as a result or put on all this medication. And that makes me think about my children. It's like, to this day, my daughter is still very repetitive. My daughter still watches the same cartoons over and over. She still plays and does the same things. She still wears her hair the same exact way. She has to wear the same hairstyle. She does not change up on anything. It's like, she has these repetitive behaviors. And I remember she used to even get to the point where she liked strange things. She liked, looking at people, throw up and all. She was fascinated with all this stuff. And it's like, I think about, had she had been diagnosed properly, would she have been able to learn different ways to cope? Would she have been able to, progress more to the point where all of this is not happening? Then I think of my son, who I feel had it also, but his wasn't as severe as his sisters. And it's like, he's getting in trouble now, has a felony because of his spontaneous behavior. They always talk about how spontaneous he is. And like I said, my son I talked about in another video, my son had always had spontaneous behavior where he would just dart off in traffic and I would have to walk around and put a child harness on him like he was on a leash, because he would just run off when we go into stores. As soon as we get in the store, he would run off. We couldn't find him. We were spending nearly 30 minutes walking around the store trying to look for him, and I'd be in a panic thinking that he was going to be abducted. And my son would just, like I said, he would dart off in traffic, or he would be fascinated with certain things like knives, and he would just take things. He would take things out of the stores. So had this been diagnosed, could my children have gotten the proper treatment instead of going to public school? Yes, they took special education classes. Yes, they had IEPs, but I wanted them to go to a school that was more focused for their condition, where they could have gotten the right help that they needed, the proper help. And this is what the Lord was showing me. This is something that has been going on. And it's another form of racism where a lot of minority children, especially those who are poor, of low socioeconomic status, has not gotten the proper mental health diagnosis, the proper diagnosis for their disabilities, and been able to go to the proper schools and get the right treatment they needed. And a lot of this would have cost money. So he's showing me how a lot of this was done because it would have cost money. And so I believe that, I don't know for certain, but I believe seriously that, they knew that my daughter was misdiagnosed. They knew that, she had autism, or was at least on the autistic spectrum, and that I was pursuing, legal problem. I was going to pursue legal action because I had already talked to my mom about that. And so when my daughter was taken out of the home, they had taken her actually to this hospital and they kept her there. They told us we had to leave. When Child Services came in, DCFS came in, they escorted us out with the police and told us not to come back. And my daughter was left in that hospital for an entire week. And I remember when I saw my daughter while she was in foster care, all of a sudden she started thinking differently. Like, she got a little bit smarter. Like, things started changing, but she still had the same characteristics and traits, but she was responding differently, acting differently. Things, it's like something was done differently with her brain. I don't know. But she was acting like she was a little bit more intelligent. But now she's reverted back to that state where, you know, like I said, she's having these tantrums. She doesn't know how to express herself. As I put videos up here, and then they're saying it's her behavior, and they're penalizing us by saying, oh, well, she can't visit with her family. She hasn't even been able to visit with us for 5 months because DCFS, Children Family Services, is saying my daughter's behavior, she acts out. Well, had you diagnosed her properly, maybe she wouldn't be having these behaviors. And it's like these children get penalized when they're not diagnosed properly. They are the ones who are suffering. They become adults and they have to suffer because they cannot function in society because they're walking around here with the wrong diagnosis. And this is something, a lot of this is done intentional, like I said, because this is a part of racial discrimination, socioeconomic injustice. When you're discriminating against someone who is of a lower economic status, when they're not from a family that has a certain amount of money, or you're stereotyping them based off of, you know, the type of parents they have, or, you know, if they're born to single parent households. And this is a lot of stuff. This is stuff that's evil. And like I said, this is something that God's going to start judging people for. You wonder why a lot of people are not going to make it into the kingdom of heaven. This is because the systemic racism, because of the modernized slavery, all of the forms of oppression and bondage and things that you're doing, all the cover-ups, all of the corruption, and you think God doesn't know about it. You think he doesn't see what's going on. A lot of you don't fear him, but you will know who he is, because a lot of this is being exposed now. And God is going to start dealing with it. He's going to start judging those and punishing those who've done these things. Because these people, these children and these families have not been able to get the type of help that they need. I was trying. Even though I was young, in my early 20s, I didn't know much. I mean, I knew what I could. I did what I could to try to get the right help for my children. But as a result, we were punished and penalized, and they come in the house and take our kids out of the house and say, oh, I was a neglectful parent. And they're doing it to a lot of children, a lot of families.